This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you're looking to be the next social media mogul, or you're just a hipster British guy who likes making mixtapes, you can do it all with a Squarespace website.
I used to follow Casey McQuiston on Tumblr, and I can't remember if they were in Hamilton fandom, but they were in the Social Network fandom, so I absolutely would not be surprised LMAO.
There's a rumor that the characters are based off Jesse Eisenberg x Andrew Garfield Social Network RPF LOL. Evidence is circumstantial, but it does put things in perspective.
Allegedly it was influenced by the author's old social network, Andrew Garfield x Jesse Eisenberg RPF crying laughing emoji crying laughing emoji crying laughing emoji.
Wildest thing about this book is it started as a social network fanfic.
I think about how this book started out as TSN 2011 press tour RPF. Every day of my life I will never know peace.
I feel like it's worth noting that this book was inspired by the author's social network RPF.
Also, it's alleged red, white, and royal blue may have had its origins as the Social Network RPF.
There's a pretty credible theory that red, white, and royal blue is adapted from an Andrew Garfield Jesse Eisenberg fanfiction that Casey wrote in the Obama era, which could account for some of the vibes you picked up on throughout the book.
Okay, I'll bite. Was red, white, and royal blue originally social network fanfiction? For the folks just tuning in now, I recently made a video about a couple of political problems I had had with the novel Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and that was all in good fun. I mostly liked the book, but in the video I talked a little bit about structural versus performative change and went on a much too long Hamilton tangent, but then something unexpected happened, which is that a lot of people started commenting about this rumor, essentially, that not only had author Casey McQuiston once been very active in the social network fandom, but that Red, White, and Royal Blue itself had started out as social network fanfiction.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
This news hit me like a train. I had never heard anything about this. Something that I love about the internet and having been involved in fandom culture at various points over the years is the sheer weirdness of that particular pocket of society. The way that even for someone like me who considers themselves pretty on top of fandom trends and lingo of the last couple decades, it's just such a deep well that sometimes I'll hear about something that I just had no idea was even going on. Case in point, the Social Network fandom. You all remember The Social Network, the 2010 David Fincher, Aaron Sorkin biographical film. The film, of course, follows a young Mark Zuckerberg as he creates the website that will eventually become the astronomically successful Facebook, or Meta, or whatever the hell you call it. Now, in the film and in real life, Mark Zuckerberg had partnered with fellow Harvard student Eduardo Saverin, played in the movie by Andrew Garfield, and the rest is history, in more ways than one. Like most pieces of media that attract a large shipping fan base, fan works depicting a romantic and/or sexual relationship between Mark and Eduardo began to pop up almost immediately upon the film's release. But it didn't end there. In addition to a fandom dedicated to shipping the characters from the film, there was also a not insignificant amount of RPF shippers. What's RPF? Well, RPF stands for Real Person Fanfiction, the concept of shipping not just characters, but real-life people. You might be thinking, wait, but Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin are already real people. Isn't shipping them at all already RPF? And that's a complicated one. I would say technically yes, but for all intents and purposes, no. I don't think anyone in the social network fandom really shipped Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin, the real-life people. I think they shipped the characters from the movie, who acted a certain way that was different from reality, and also looked like Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield. But in this case, you had people not only shipping Mark and Eduardo as they appeared in the movie, but also people shipping Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield, the real-life actors. It doesn't appear to have been the biggest ship in the world. Currently on Archive of Our Own, there are about 2,200 Mark x Eduardo fanfics and 240 Jesse x Andrew fics, but those are still very respectable numbers, and I've heard that the fandom on Tumblr at the time was pretty large. Now, how does this all tie into Casey McQuiston? Well, for various reasons, there are persistent rumors that McQuiston was not only a pretty involved member of this fanbase during its peak popularity, but that they had written an alternate universe social network fanfiction and would go on to publish that fanfiction as Red, White, and Royal Blue, after changing the names and a few small other details, a practice known as filing the serial numbers off. In making this video, I want to find out whether there is any substance to these rumors. There is certainly precedent for this type of thing happening. Famously, E.L. James's 50 Shades of Grey started out as an alternate universe Twilight fanfiction called Master of the Universe. A few years later, Anna Todd would repackage After, her angsty fanfic about a tatted-up bad boy alcoholic named Harry Styles, into an angsty original novel about a tatted-up bad boy alcoholic named Hardin Scott. This practice doesn't have the best reputation, largely because the two most famous examples of it are dog shit, but also due to the general cultural disdain for fanfiction as a concept. So I want to be very clear that I actually respect fanfiction authors a lot. I wouldn't have the context to be able to make this video had I not read some fanfiction in my time. A lot of people automatically dismiss fanfiction because it's derivative work, and perhaps more so because it's associated with fandom culture, which people think is cringeworthy, and young women, which people also think are cringeworthy. But fanfiction isn't a monolith, it's a medium. Just like any medium, there are examples of very low quality and very high quality. And honestly, if you're a writer producing high-quality fanfiction and you decide to repurpose that writing to publish, I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. Like I said, most examples of this are alternate universe fanfiction, which means the author has already removed the fictional characters from the setting and plot of the original work, so they're really not even that derivative. I wouldn't call it tantamount to plagiarism or anything. I just want to put that out there to set the tone for this video. Casey McQuiston, if you somehow end up watching this, the goal is not just to make fun of you for having written fan fiction before. That's a very normal thing to do, and does not say anything about the quality of your writing or your character. But the thing about me is, I love a rabbit hole. You can't just say the words Red, White, and Royal Blue started out as social network fan fiction and expect me not to want to get to the bottom of it. So this will be a bit of an investigation into as many corners of this mystery as I can find. There are a lot of conflicting rumors and claims flying around, but together, I believe that we can uncover the truth. Because what comes to mind when you hear the word YouTuber? That's right, journalistic integrity. Let's do this.
I'm a little intoxicated, I'm not gonna lie. So what if it's not even 10 p.m. and it's a Tuesday night?
This is such a widespread rumor that the fan lore page for Red, White, and Royal Blue itself contains a section called Original Work or Fan Fiction, with some examples of fans' speculation on this subject. One little note here, Casey McQuiston goes by they/them pronouns, but didn't always, so some of the older comments I'm going to read originally referred to them with she/her pronouns, and I've changed them to they/them just to be as respectful as possible, so if you're wondering why any of these screenshots look slightly doctored, that's why. That's the only way in which they're abridged. Interestingly, one of fanlore's examples is this Tumblr post in which a user notes similarities between Red, White, and Royal Blue and a Merlin fanfiction. I was surprised to see this because I'd been under the impression that all of the fanfiction accusations leveled at this book were about social network fanfic. I had not seen anyone mention Merlin fanfic before this. But apparently modern royalty AUs, that's short for alternate universe for the uninitiated, were popular in the Merlin fandom, so some people have drawn comparisons between the two. This person specifically compares two slightly similar passages from Red, White, and Royal Blue and a Merlin fic called The Student Prince. I honestly don't think there's anything too suspicious about these two passages. They're expressing a similar idea, but the phrasing is different, the situation is different. I doubt the Student Prince inspired Red, White, and Royal Blue. Although, in fairness, I also cannot technically prove that. The fanlore page also cites this thread of tweets from user Ardentleys. Some of my mutuals finding out that Red, White, and Royal Blue was a Social Network fanfiction this week is so funny to me. No, because I really thought we all knew this. It's so funny. Casey McQuiston wrote a royal AU of Andrew Garfield and Jesse Eisenberg falling in love, and it was on AO3. Another interesting tweet from the same user. Red, White, and Royal Blue. It was announced that they were going to make a movie out of the book today, and today is the Social Network anniversary, and everyone's finding out again. Fascinating. We have a couple of accusations here. Not only is this person certain that this Royal AU Social Network fanfic exists, but they say it was even on Archive of Our Own, one of the more popular modern fanfic websites. They also claim that the date the Red, White, and Royal Blue movie was announced was also the anniversary of the Social Network. I'm assuming they mean anniversary of the release date. That part is actually true. The news that the Red, White, and Royal Blue movie was officially happening did drop on October 1st, 2021, exactly 11 years after The Social Network was released in theaters. I'm not positive we can rule out this being a coincidence, though. Like, would the author of the book really have that much control over when the studio announces the production of the film? But an interesting detail, nonetheless. Some other info I found in relation to this was a Reddit post from 2 years ago. Someone in the r/faux-moi subreddit had asked, any bookworld/author tea? Inspired by the DC post, does anyone have any good gossip on the book world, or are there any accounts/sources that are doing it? One user commented, Casey McQuiston, author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, used to be a BNF, that means big name fan, someone with a lot of clout in fandom, in various fandoms and had a popular Tumblr account. They wrote a ton of /fic, so it's pretty unsurprising their breakout novel is basically a glorified MM fanfic. MM in this case means male/male. A couple more people replied to that comment with more details. Isn't Red, White, and Royal Blue a reworking of their AU fanfic about Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield? Pretty sure Carry It In My Heart was the fic that it was based on. I vaguely remember someone on Tumblr picking through Carry It In My Heart and Red, White, and Royal Blue and comparing similar lines since even though the fic was pulled to publish, downloads are still available online. So notably, this is the first time we've heard someone identify the fanfic in question by name. Carry It In My Heart by user robin-pulaski, which I sincerely hope is an esoteric reference to something I don't know about, and not a reference to disgraced filmmaker Roman Polanski. Carry It In My Heart, along with the account robin-pulaski, have been long deleted. There's no trace of robin-pulaski on Tumblr or LiveJournal, despite various people's recollections of them having a presence on those platforms at some point. If anything, this kind of adds credibility to the theory that McQuiston was robin-pulaski, because if the author of the fanfiction were to become a successful published author, they probably would go back and scrub the internet of any traces of their fanfic past. That being said, the fanfiction itself has been preserved. People downloaded it at the time, and you can still find copies, which is very good news for us. More on that later. Seemingly one of the first mentions of McQuiston's ties to the robin-pulaski account on the internet is this 2020 Tumblr post by user Queen Trogdor. Is Casey McQuiston robin-pulaski? I just finished Red, White, and Royal Blue, and there were some turns of phrases that sounded very like Carry It In My Heart. Yes, I mean the bit about maps, other bits too, but particularly that bit. I unfollowed Robin years ago, so IDK if they're even still on Tumblr, but the author photo looks a lot like I remember their selfies. They're both from Louisiana and worked in journalism. Anyway, I bring it up because I heard Red, White, and Royal Blue started as a Royalty AU The Social Network fanfic. IDK, it's 4 a.m. here, and I can't find any information about either of them, so that's my weird conspiracy. Edit. Yeah, I called it. For the record, I don't know what confirmation of their theory they could be referencing in that last bit. A couple of these sources linked to a TikTok that supposedly had more information, but the account has now been made private, so I don't know what it said. I did find this TikTok where user Tony Snark discusses similarities between Carry It In My Heart and Red, White, and Royal Blue.
But the thing that really gets me is, like, the actual similarities between, like, Red, White, and Royal Blue and this fic. Like, there's literally the whole, like, key thing going, like, happening. Like, it literally ends with Jesse, like, having the key of their loft that they share together. And if you remember in Red Wine Royal Blue, Alex carried the key with him from his home in Texas. Like, guys.
Besides all that, I saw a few other people regurgitating this rumor or refuting it, but often without any source or reasoning for why they believe what they believe. For example, in this recent Paste magazine article, Kaylee Donaldson writes, "It was long rumored that the book was initially fanfic for the Social Network before McQuiston pulled a 50 Shades of Grey and filed off the serial numbers. That's not true, but the book still feels very rooted in the styles and themes of fic that readers so thoroughly love." Like I said, no reasoning for why they believe it's not true. Then, there's this very strange line in Rolling Stone's review of the film adaptation of Red, White, and Royal Blue, where critic C.T. Jones writes, "In a royal enemies-to-lovers plotline dragged straight out of the Social Network fanfiction, Alex and Henry must navigate an election year, coming out, and a clandestine relationship as two of the most highly scrutinized celebs in the world, all while having lots and lots of sex." It's strange that Jones just drops that in without any context or clarification. Do they mean it's like a Social Network fanfic, or it's literally dragged straight out of a Social Network fanfic? Surely they're referencing the rumors, but the way they phrased it, it just sounds like they got Social Network vibes from the romance, which, like, from what they described, that's not the plot of the Social Network. But all in all, here is what we know. Or, in the spirit of Red, White, and Royal Blue, let's quote Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton. "I realize 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time. Number 1, Casey McQuiston wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue. Number 2, in 2011, an unidentified author going by the username Robin-Pulaski wrote a Social Network fanfiction called Carry It in My Heart. Number 3, Robin-Pulaski allegedly looked exactly like Casey McQuiston, was also from Louisiana, had also worked in journalism, and had a very similar writing style to Casey McQuiston. Ladies and gentlemen and others of the jury, I think we have an open and shut case on our hands. In light of the evidence, I think it's safe to assume that Casey McQuiston is the author of Carry It in My Heart, the most beloved Social Network real person fanfiction in the entire Social Network real person fanfiction community. So, case closed, right? Well, just one more thing.
They'll hire private detectives who will follow you day and night. You're a target for high-priced escorts. I can't prove it, but I know they tap my phones. Whatever it is that's gonna trip you up, you've done already.
After doing all this research and gathering evidence, one thing was still bugging me. To paraphrase T.S. Eliot, it led me to an overwhelming question. Look, I referenced an English modernist poet. That's right, 2 can play at that game. Although I was now pretty confident that McQuiston wrote Carry It in My Heart, and that said fanfiction allegedly bore some similarities to Red, White, and Royal Blue, there was still this phantom hanging over the entire situation. And that was this supposed Social Network royalty AU fanfiction that a couple of the above sources had mentioned. Not just the author's unrelated Social Network fanfic with some stylistic similarities to Red, White, and Royal Blue, but a thematically relevant, royalty-themed Social Network fanfic that would have served as a direct prototype for Red, White, and Royal Blue, the ultimate source to these claims that Red, White, and Royal Blue started out as a Social Network fanfic. I had to ask, does such a fanfiction exist? And the short answer is probably not. When I tell you I searched and scoured the internet for any trace of this thing, I started out on Archive of Our Own, and I did find a couple of interesting things. Namely, one Jesse and Andrew fic that was a politics AU in which Andrew Garfield has been elected President of the United States. You might be wondering how this British man could become President of the United States. I was also wondering that at first. But in fairness, Andrew Garfield was apparently born in the US and has dual citizenship, so Technically, it could happen. I know who I'm writing in on my 2024 ballot. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Anyway, obviously the subject matter of this fic jumped out at me, and honestly the prose is also a little McQuiston-esque. It's not quite as polished as their recent work, but I mean, we would be talking about someone's prose from 11 or 12 years ago, so that could track. But to be clear, I'm not actually accusing McQuiston of writing this fanfic. I highly doubt it's one of theirs. They probably would have deleted it if it was. I just thought it was funny. Then there was this other one in which Jesse Eisenberg is the son of the president. So again, that piqued my interest, but in this case the prose was pretty un-McQuiston-like, and it's also from 2017, which would have been when McQuiston was already working on Red, White, and Royal Blue in its current form, so I doubt they would have written such a similar premise in the Social Network fandom at the time, let alone posted it and left it up. But I kept looking. I even ended up on the Wayback Machine looking at Archive of Our Own from 2011. But after quite a bit of combing through Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield fanfiction on AO3, I realized that Carry It in My Heart had actually originally been posted on LiveJournal, so I was probably wasting my time. So I shifted over to ancient LiveJournal pages on the Wayback Machine, and I had pretty bad luck with this. A lot of the search terms I tried looking for led me to dead pages or pages that hadn't been archived, and once I finally found one little helpful nugget on current LiveJournal, an old post referencing Carry It in My Heart with a link back to the work itself, not only was that link now dead, even through the Wayback Machine, but any attempt to recover anything from the robin-pulaski account turned up nothing. I don't know if that means that deleting your LiveJournal account is just really, really effective and can actually remove all traces of it from the internet, or if maybe I'm just missing something about the Wayback Machine. This was my first time really trying to use it. But I could not get through to this account. It appears to be truly wiped from the internet, which I think is kind of sad. I know this isn't necessarily vital cultural preservation, but I would consider myself something of a fanfiction historian as of this month, and I feel a little disappointed that I will just never get to see what this account was posting, what other fan works McQuiston might have written at the time. But they deleted the account. That's their prerogative. I guess I'm not entitled to full documentation of every LiveJournal account that's ever existed. Ultimately, after all my spelunking, I think it's safe to say that this Social Network Royalty AU fic probably never existed. Given the enduring popularity of Carry It in My Heart, I feel like if Casey McQuiston had written a lengthy Social Network Royalty AU, it would probably be out there somewhere. I would probably be able to find undeleted posts about it from fans, or people's saved downloads of the entire thing. Instead, it seems like the idea that it existed is most likely just the result of wires getting crossed in this whole author of Red, White, and Royal Blue used to write social network fanfiction thing. I feel like for some reason, when people find out an author used to write fanfiction, there's this urge to believe that all of their current work must somehow just be their repurposed fanfiction, and I don't really know why that is. My theory is that all these people on the internet slowly uncovering various things about the author's fandom past and how it relates to their published work have essentially been engaged in a big game of telephone wherein the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue once wrote a social network fanfiction that was stylistically rather similar to their eventual book, evolved into Red, White, and Royal Blue is just social network fanfiction with the serial numbers filed off. And I feel fairly confident in saying that the latter statement is not true. But that's not where this story ends. After trying and failing to find an actual fanfiction precursor to Red, White, and Royal Blue, with that avenue exhausted, there was only one thing left for me to do. Read Carry It in My Heart. Okay, there were technically two things, actually. Read Carry It in My Heart, and tell you all about today's sponsor, Squarespace. As you might have noticed, today's episode of my YouTube channel has been all about the internet, and something I've realized while checking out all these ancient web pages from the early 2010s is that there's nothing I love more than a good old-fashioned website. Squarespace, of course, is a website building platform, and there's virtually no end to what you can do with a Squarespace site. It's super easy to design your website in the first place. You can pick from a huge range of flexible templates and really make them your own, and you can even edit your site from your phone on the Squarespace app. Of course, in this video, we're talking a lot about online self-published writing, and as I've said before, one of my favorite parts about hosting a website with Squarespace is all of the blogging tools that they have.
I was drunk and angry and stupid.
And blogging.
And blogging.
I tend to want to use this for articles and essays and what have you, but it can also be a great place to post fiction. Dare I say, fan fiction. If you're a discerning reader who enjoys highbrow, multimedia work, good news. Squarespace makes it easy to add photos, videos, and links into all your blog posts. I've decided to basically publish my document full of relevant links and evidence that I've been compiling for this video onto my Squarespace blog, and it was super easy to embed the links and add visual aid where necessary. It can be nice to carve out your own space online, and with Squarespace you can create a portfolio for your artwork, or host your podcast, or sell your pottery, or even write that sweet, sweet Jesse Eisenberg fanfic on your own terms. You can head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to press play on that mixtape full of 2011 indie hits, you can go to squarespace.com/Mulcahy for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now it's time to go review a novel-length piece of social network fanfiction. Wish me luck.
Sorry! My Prada's at the cleaners! Along with my hoodie and my fuck you flip-flops, you pretentious douchebag!
Carry It in My Heart is a 48,000-word fanfiction about the actors Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield befriending each other and ultimately falling in love during the principal photography of the 2010 David Fincher film The Social Network. The fic is from Jesse's perspective and involves the two actors moving in together at the start of filming, which I don't think is a true fact about the production of The Social Network, but I am also definitely not the expert here. It is also a multimedia fanfic. It includes occasional pictures, notes, playlists, little pieces of supplemental material for enjoying the fic, which I thought was kind of fun. It's very creative. Now, I have some earth-shattering news for you guys about Carry It in My Heart. And that is that Carry It in My Heart is actually not very similar to Red, White, and Royal Blue at all. I went into this fully expecting entire lifted passages here and there, or at least similar dynamics between the characters, similar patterns of events, and honestly I did not find them. The prose is certainly recognizable, and I'll go into that in more detail in a minute, but it's really only to the extent that you can tell both works are probably by the same author, not to the extent that you could say one is inspired by the other or evolved from the other. First I'll tell you what similarities there are between the two, then the differences, and then I'd like to go into other stuff I noticed and want to share with you for one reason or another. So right off the bat, Carry It in My Heart and Red, White, and Royal Blue have very similar narration and point of view. They are both in third-person limited POV in the present tense. So, for example, instead of Alex or Jesse, who are our POV characters, saying, like, I walked over to the table, the narration would say, he walks over to the table. If you're familiar with fanfiction, you may have already noted that this is a POV tense combination that's very common in fanfiction, and I've been trying to think about why that may be. There's something very immediate about this type of narration. It's very engaging in a way because it's so direct. It's almost a little like writing stage directions or action in a screenplay, and I wonder if that's easier for writers who are starting out because you don't necessarily have to get bogged down worrying too much about your prose. It's just like, he does this, it's very in the moment. And I'm not trying to condescend. Like I said, I think there are advantages to using this style, but it is also kind of risky because at worst, I think it can make things sound a little juvenile. Like, controversial take, I think Red, White, and Royal Blue could have benefited from not using this, at least not using the present tense. but that is also probably just a matter of taste. It's just my opinion. But that aspect is part of what makes these two pieces of writing feel like they're related. There are also similar plot points here and there, but like with the style of prose, I have to say most of these things are just things that are typical of a lot of fan fiction, so keep that in mind. Both Carry It in My Heart and Red, White, and Royal Blue have that thing of the main character always having thought they were straight until they meet that one guy that causes their entire gay or bisexual awakening. I'm not saying that's never happened before in real life, I'm just saying it seems to happen a lot more in fan fiction than in real life. Both Henry in Red, White, and Royal Blue and Andrew in Carry It in My Heart eventually reveal that they were in love with Alex/Jesse from the first moment they met. Both feature the couples having sex in a bar bathroom at some point, but again, not the most uncommon type of thing to happen in fan fiction or romance writing at large. Both have moments where Alex/Jesse wake up the morning after an emotionally significant night to find Henry/Andrew gone. In terms of things that are more unique to these particular works, both have instances of Alex/Jesse describing all the things they want to show Henry/Andrew in their home states. And perhaps most notably, both works end with a key to a certain home as symbolism for the respective couples' budding relationships. In Red, White, and Royal Blue, Alex has always kept the key to his childhood home in Texas on a chain around his neck, and at the very end of the book, he takes Henry to that house and they unlock the door. Carry It in My Heart ends with Jesse keeping the key to his and Andrew's apartment that they shared together during the filming of The Social Network as a keepsake of this special time they had together. That's pretty much the extent of the plot similarities, and like I said, only a couple are even that specific to the stories in question. Some of these things are more like conventions of the genre. The only other main thing I noticed was the repetition of certain types of phrases throughout both works. The alleged author of both pieces of writing has a habit of using certain types of phrasing over and over again. And again, I'd say the phrasing in question is somewhat common to this type of writing, but it's also a little funny just how similar some of these sentences are, and just how often they pop up in both works. For example, these sentences that involve someone saying, well, with a period after it. That might sound vague, but let me show you what I mean. Here are a bunch of excerpts from Carry It in My Heart. The thing about Andrew is, well, it's hard to say. It doesn't make sense how easily they always fall into this rhythm with each other, because, well. And that's, well, it's a weird thought. And just, well, this is, well, it's not that Jesse typically has an issue talking about his feelings. That's, well, that's fucking spot on. It's, well, it's hard not to notice that there's kind of a recurring theme here. And here are some excerpts from Red, White, and Royal Blue. Ha, well, I don't know what kind of sexual crisis you're having right now, like 4 years after it would have been useful, but, well. It was just that first one that was, well. Well, she looks down at her cuticles. Well, that just shall not do. Well, it will matter, you know. It will always matter. Well, the point stands. Well, I gotta tell you guys. Well, we were going to wait to announce it. Well, just in case of concession. I just feel like well with a period after it is not that common of a written phrase, and instead is kind of a hallmark of this author specifically. The other big one I noticed, and the more unique one, was the repeated use of the thing is, or that's the thing phrasing. Carry It in My Heart. The thing about Andrew is, well. That's the very first line of the fic, and it's a double whammy. But that's the thing about Andrew. And, the thing is. But the thing is, he still really, really, really likes being around Andrew. The thing about acting, and that's the thing about Andrew. The thing is, Justin's not his sister. But the thing is, this is exactly the kind of thing Andrew would do. But the thing is, when you're somebody like Jesse, Jesse looks at him, and the thing is, Red, White, and Royal Blue. The thing is, he does, and Henry knows this too. That's the thing, he doesn't know. But the thing is, it would work. But the thing is, jumping off cliffs is kinda my thing. I have to say, viewer, I think this is our smoking gun. Like I said, the claims that Red, White, and Royal Blue was originally Social Network fanfic or was inspired by Social Network fanfic are most likely inaccurate, but the claims that Casey McQuiston wrote Carry It in My Heart, I believe, are all but confirmed by these passages alone. And yes, it's also very funny how many times they repeat the phrase "the thing is" in Carry It in My Heart. But the thing about fanfiction is, well, you don't usually have an editor. I'm sorry, that was uncalled for. But that's genuinely about it. That is the extent of the specific similarities. So now let's discuss the main ways in which these works differ from each other. What surprised me the most in reading Carry It in My Heart was that the characters and their dynamic were quite different from those in Red, White, and Royal Blue. Based on what other people had said about it, I thought the two relationships would be very similar, and they're not. In fact, I would go so far as to say that really the only thing these two sets of characters have in common is that one guy is American and one guy is British. Andrew Garfield, as written by Robin-Pulaski, is a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, kind of lights up every room he's in, and only really gets dark and stormy when he's in the depths of thinking that Jesse Eisenberg doesn't love him back, and or getting deep into his character of Eduardo Saverin. Conversely, in Red, White, and Royal Blue, Henry is a very moody character right off the bat. He comes with a lot of baggage. He's a very repressed guy, in addition to still really struggling with the death of his father. Like most McQuiston characters, they both do their fair share of quipping, but I would say Andrew and Henry are very different people. Then you have Alex and Jesse. I kind of just decided on which characters corresponded to each other because, one is the American POV character and one is the British object of their affections. You get it. In Red, White, and Royal Blue, Alex definitely has some underlying anxieties, and one of his big character traits is that he pushes himself very hard, but externally, he is a very socially confident person. He's never really struggled to fit in or connect with people. Conversely, the Jesse Eisenberg of Carry It in My Heart is extremely introverted and socially awkward. How do I say this? Almost to the point of being a little insulting. Don't get me wrong. I really have no stake in defending the honor of actor Jesse Eisenberg, but at various points throughout reading this fic, I would be like, damn, ouch. It's weird, right? Because I assume the author must have really liked Jesse Eisenberg to be able to write an entire sensitive romantic fan fiction from his perspective, but they also kind of depict him as this childlike, naive, virginal weirdo. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being inexperienced or socially awkward. I can relate, but it feels like a slightly condescending portrayal of this real person. They treat him like a 27-year-old, 15-year-old. Now that I've accidentally transitioned into questionable stuff in this fanfic, let's continue on this thread. In terms of story, probably the biggest flaw is just that it suffers from the same issues a lot of long-form fanfiction does. By that I mean that it doesn't really have much of a tight, conflict-driven story. Instead, it spends a lot of time in this meandering cycle of vaguely romantic scenarios followed by Jesse Eisenberg doubting himself and agonizing over whether to tell Andrew how he feels, and then that cycle repeats. I've heard some people say that Red, White, and Royal Blue has the same problem, and while I can kind of see that, I think the premise of that book carries it. There's enough built-in conflict there. And that book is also less of a slow burn. Things happen at a faster pace. Whereas in Carry It in My Heart, after a while, you start to question why these adult men can't just tell each other they want to date each other. But then again, all that being said, that's often the point of fanfiction, right? The reader wants you to draw out the tension as much as possible. And also, of course, this is a self-published work that someone made for free, so I feel like it's a lot to expect it to be perfectly paced or structured. Another thing about this fic, and about RPF in general, that tends to take me out of it is that authors always seem to think that the only friends that these celebrities could possibly have are the other celebrities they work with or come into contact with. In fairness, they might not actually believe that that's how it works, but just want the supporting characters in their fanfic to be recognizable to the fans reading. So for example, whenever Jesse has a problem in this fic, he'll call up his bestie, Emma Stone. co-star of the famous Jesse Eisenberg film Zombieland. Whenever Jesse or Andrew go to parties or hangouts, it's always with their Social Network co-stars, which that part may not be that crazy, I guess. Like, they're all in Massachusetts for the shoot, where they probably don't know anyone other than their coworkers, but it's still really funny to see Jesse Eisenberg get unsolicited advice on his gay situationship from Justin Timberlake. Or, even scarier in light of recent revelations, Armie Hammer? This is the first time Armie's seen the two of them together since they became, well, together. And Jesse's actually a little nervous about it. Maybe it's the 8 inches and 80 pounds Armie has on him, or the fact that he's constantly exuding this air of effortless class, but he's kind of started to feel like a big brother to him. Somehow, it feels like it'd be reassuring to have his blessing. Jesse, trust me, the last person you want to approve of your relationship is Armie Hammer. Then there's this part where Andrew brings a friend over to their apartment, and it's Carey Mulligan, and she and Emma Stone end up, like, sneakily facilitating the two guys getting together. You know how girls do that. I will say, earlier when I was combing through other Jesse x Andrew fics to try and find evidence, I noticed that most of these Social Network RPFs include other cast members and relevant celebrities, so to be fair, this isn't like an invention on the part of the author. Similarly to Red, White, and Royal Blue, Carry It in My Heart includes a lot of pop culture references, which isn't always necessarily a problem, and I know this sounds petty, but sometimes it would take me out of it when the author would express a pop cultural opinion that I disagreed with. Like, the characters watch a lot of Doctor Who, because this is a fandom work from 2011, and at one point Jesse mentions how much they both hate Rose from Doctor Who for some reason. And I like Rose Tyler. Sue me. Then later on, there's this kind of backhanded jab at Taylor Swift, another blonde woman that I like. By the way, this only adds to the evidence that Casey McQuiston wrote it, because they have a well-documented history of hating on Taylor Swift. Anyway, I know it doesn't really affect the quality of the fanfic, but these things did take me out of it and made me less on the side of the author, so I do think maybe it's wise when writing something to just not express very personal, irrelevant fandom opinions. Then, this is an equally silly but slightly more valid issue. At times in this fic, Andrew Garfield speaks some French, and his French is often incorrect. And I don't think it's on purpose. Like here, he says, je suis pas. It should be je ne suis pas. And then he's talking about crying during the movie Bambi, and he says, j'ai crié. Crié doesn't actually mean crying in French, it means like yelling. What he should have said was j'ai pleuré. Now, I wasn't in the room with the author when they wrote this, but it seems like they may have just plugged the lines into Google Translate and hoped for the best, which is never a good idea. On a more serious note, there are a couple of weird lines about Jewish people in this fanfiction. Here's the thing, or should I say, the thing is, apparently the ship name for Andrew Garfield and Jesse Eisenberg back in the day was Junicorn? This even has its own entry on Urban Dictionary, which explains this as, quote, both of them are Jews who were clearly raised by unicorns in a magical forest somewhere, unquote. Oh, 2010 internet culture. By the way, this entry is from Robin Sparkles. Any relation to Robin-Pulaski? Anyway, I don't feel quite qualified to weigh in on whether this is offensive or not, so I will leave that up to audience interpretation. But what I'm trying to say is that there seems to have been some fandom precedent for focusing on and being slightly weird about the fact that both of the actors in this ship were Jewish, and in that vein, there are some mentions of it in this fic that I thought were a little strange. For example, you're the Jewiest Jew that ever Jewed. Or, like, I thought you were too busy being all neurotic and Jewish to have sexual impulses. Odd thing to say. However, I don't technically know for sure that Casey McQuiston is not Jewish, and I also don't technically even know for sure that they wrote this fanfic. So, once again, audience interpretation. There were also a couple questionable lines regarding fat people, but I do want to clarify, this fanfiction is really old. It's 12 years old, and I don't think we can really judge people based on fan fiction they wrote 12 years ago, especially when they're young enough that they would have been quite young 12 years ago. So don't take this as me trying to cancel the author or whatever. I don't really think any of this would be representative of who they are now. It's more just that I am giving you my breakdown of this fanfic, so I want to share with you all the parts that I found notable, whether good, funny, or questionable. So, speaking of which, let's get a little more positive. First, I'll tell you the funny stuff. This is a neutral category. These things aren't good or bad, they're just funny. There's this thing throughout the fanfic that Jesse Eisenberg is a huge musical theater fan. I have no idea if this is an invention on the part of the author or a real-life Eisen fact, but his favorite is the Fantastics, which is funny for reasons I don't even know how to describe. Andrew gets Jesse a really thoughtful gift at one point. He drives them all the way to this obscure record store that has an original copy of the Fantastics soundtrack on vinyl. He says he called the place beforehand and everything. And for some reason, my first thought was, I bet original vinyl copies of the Fantastics soundtrack are not that hard to come by, because in my experience, when you go to a used record store or a thrift store with a vinyl section, like half the stock is old Broadway albums. Right now, in my childhood home, we have not one but 2 original copies of the Oliver soundtrack. And we're not even that into that musical, we just have them. So I looked it up, and there are so many copies of the Fantastics on eBay right now. You can get one on eBay for like $2 to $7. This doesn't make it not a thoughtful gift on Andrew's part. Gifts don't have to be rare or expensive to be thoughtful, but it is a little funny that he went so far out of his way to get a record he could have easily obtained online, yes, even in 2010. And also, it says he pays for it after they get to the store. So I was also laughing, imagining him doing this big reveal, like, look, Jesse, I got you this amazing, thoughtful gift, and Jesse being all impressed, and then the cashier having to be like, all right, that'll be $4. And then later in the story, one of Jesse's Hanukkah gifts to Andrew is the Light in the Piazza soundtrack. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I guess these are funny to me because they're like the last musicals that I would think of. But I have to respect that about the story. It's way more unique than referencing the Wicked soundtrack or the Rent soundtrack or something. I only know the Light in the Piazza because I got really into musicals when I was 12 or 13, and I would go to the library, to the CD section, and find the Broadway CDs, and I would take them home and burn them onto our family desktop computer, and then a lot of the time I would burn my own copies of them, or my own mixtapes made up of like show tunes and Glee covers, so that I could listen to them in my room on my boombox. So actually, my experience was quite similar to what the guys in this fanfiction are doing. In fact, while reading, I kept a little list of 2011 things that just so perfectly ground this story in the year 2011. Early on, Andrew burns Jesse a CD. He actually makes him 2 different mixtapes throughout the story. And, excitingly, at one point, Jesse orders a DVD in the mail from Netflix. Back when that's what Netflix was for. The only other thing I put on this list was this line: I hate you. I hope you get Ebola. And on that note, I'd like to share with you all my other favorite lines of dialogue. Once again, Jesse Eisenberg, you're a fascinating anomaly. Quit batting your eyelashes at me. It's meretricious. Good use of meretricious, Jesse. God, who knew that under your crunchy, awkward outer shell was such a creamy fucking drama queen center? That line is spoken by Emma Stone, by the way. Then, after they kiss for the first time, Andrew Garfield says, "So, that happened." Amazing. But I've poked enough fun. Now I want to be fair and talk about what I liked about Carry It in My Heart, because there were things that I liked. The main thing that stood out to me was the entire relationship this fanfic had to the movie The Social Network. I haven't watched the movie in a long time. I remember it being very good, but its role in Carry It in My Heart is very interesting. See, from what I can tell, one of the main reasons this RPF fanbase even existed is that, to be fair to the shippers here, there was this very intense element to the performances of Andrew Garfield and Jesse Eisenberg specifically. And I don't just mean how they came off in the movie, I mean the circumstances surrounding how they gave their performances. This is something I learned for the first time while researching all this stuff for this video. The actors obviously took it very seriously, and in order to get that dynamic between Mark and Eduardo, they would do these things on set. Jesse Eisenberg talks about staying in character and having long conversations with Andrew Garfield in character. And in some behind-the-scenes content, it seems like even when they're not necessarily in character, they kind of still are. And Jesse's like negging him.
You looked like you were listening, but without listening. You looked like
exactly
you were,
what I was going for.
you looked like you were trying to look like you were listening.
You know, just saying that to make me feel good.
I was trying to make you feel bad.
You confuse me now.
What I really liked about working with you is I felt that you oftentimes were kind of like doting on me, that you really, really liked me, and it made me feel that much more kind of like almost irritated by, you know, I almost felt as though kind of my mother was always there trying to pinch my cheeks, and it's so embarrassing.
And it gets much more intense than that. In this really famous scene, what I call the laptop scene, right before filming Jesse Eisenberg's close-ups, David Fincher would have Andrew lean over to Jesse and whisper in his ear about how terrible of a person he was. Then the other big moment people talk about is something Andrew mentions on the DVD commentary track about shooting this scene where Eduardo's on the phone with Mark.
And then on my side of it, he kept on giving me these wonderful little ad-libs for me to react to for the last part of the scene where he, you know, I think at one point I made him say, "I love you, you're my best friend, come and we'll get married and we'll live in a house together," just to kind of like give me that right kind of reaction for the end of this scene. And he really generously, you know, embarrassingly told me how much he adored me.
So, although I don't really condone writing explicit fan fiction about real people, I do see why a fan base sprung up here. When I first heard about it, I was like, really? A Social Network RPF fandom? But now it makes more sense to me. This sounds like a really intense, intriguing thing they had going on here. And for me, the very best parts of Carry It in My Heart are the moments when the author uses these intense, complex scenarios that we know actually happened on the set of the film to enhance or tell us something about the fictionalized off-screen relationship. It's just an inherently interesting concept, and Robin, I would say, skillfully kind of weaves all these interesting dimensions of the premise together. The lines really start to blur between the actors and the characters they're playing, and even the real people the characters are based on. And to me personally, one of the most interesting things about all of this is the metatextual implication of it all. Like, you have this movie based on real people that created these fictionalized versions of the real people. And now fans have created these fictionalized versions of the real people who played those fictionalized versions of other real people. Like, you could write essays upon essays on whatever the hell is happening here. But with that in mind, whenever the fic even gets close to commenting on that fact or just doing something interesting with the dynamics there, that's when it really hits on something for me. That's when it feels like there's a point to telling this story. And to be clear, it doesn't fully save it for me, because the stakes are still quite low. Like, the only reason emotions are running high off screen at this part of the story is that both Jesse and Andrew like each other, but are too afraid to tell each other, and although the characters don't realize that about each other, as the reader you know that, and like I've already said, that makes the story kind of exhausting and repetitive. Far be it from me to seriously suggest improvements for a Social Network RPF, but I think that what could have made a fanfiction like this a lot more interesting is if it were just a little more fucked up. Because in my opinion, what's interesting about this whole situation that led up to this ship is not just that they're two guys with the potential to be attracted to each other, but that they're two guys, two acquaintances really, who began this intense, strange professional relationship in order to best portray this really intense, toxic relationship on screen. And if you were to write fan fiction about this situation, I think you should lean into the intensity and the strangeness. Give me more of those lines blurring, more of the power dynamic, more of the not being sure what's real and what's performance. Because as a piece of writing, Carry It in My Heart is at its most interesting by far when it's about that stuff. Not when it's about two roommates who very slowly decide to date each other. But that's also not really the purpose of most early 2010s fan fiction. I can acknowledge that. And also, I know this was supposed to be a compliment and it sort of morphed into more criticism, but you know, there is real potential here, is what I'm trying to say. That's about all I have on the fan fiction itself. It's not the best thing ever, but as fanfic goes, it's pretty well written, and I thought the multimedia element was fun and engaging. And, admittedly, it's probably best suited for people who already ship Andrew Garfield with Jesse Eisenberg, which I did not and still do not. So, obviously my enjoyment of it was going to be different than someone who was actually the target audience for this. But overall, my biggest takeaway is that it's blatantly not red, white, and royal blue. There's just no way you could make that argument. So, I would say myth busted. I wish I could tell you that this is where this story ends in relation to me, but I'm afraid I still have another, even stranger angle to share with you.
And I can read about you torturing birds. Since when does reading about
don't
something
fish! Eat other fish! The marlins and the trout!
So, you know how earlier I said that I had looked for Robin-Pulaski's LiveJournal account for their Tumblr presence on the Internet Archive and I hadn't been able to find it? Well, after having read the entire fanfiction, I actually got a new lead. I know I could have amended that earlier section with this new information, but I'm trying to take you on this journey with me. I want you to experience it in the same order that I experienced it. So, as I was writing that bit in my review of the fanfic about the ship name being Junicorn, as I said, I found this Urban Dictionary entry from one Robin Sparkles, and I wrote that line into the script jokingly, asking if Robin Sparkles had any relation to Robin-Pulaski. I had looked up Robin Sparkles and found that it was a How I Met Your Mother reference. I haven't watched that show, sorry, so I was pretty sure it wasn't related. But some little part of me said, maybe I should just check. So I searched Robin Sparkles on Tumblr, and lo and behold, a couple posts came up, alongside a lot of Stranger Things fanfiction for some reason, posts from years ago asking if Robin Sparkles, the author of Carry It in My Heart, had deleted their account. I know it might not seem like much, but for me, this was like the twist at the end of the horror movie. The anti-denouement, in the words of Janet Stager. It's like I'm the girl waking up in the hospital, and I'm like, what happened to the boy? The boy who was in the lake? And the cop's like, we didn't find any boy.
Then he's still there.
The reason I hadn't found any record of Robin-Pulaski on Tumblr was because they weren't going by Robin-Pulaski on Tumblr. They were going by Robin Sparkles. This also made me feel like the evil genius supervillain to Robin-Pulaski. Like, they were so careful. They thought of almost everything. The Tumblr, the LiveJournal, but nobody ever thinks to delete their Urban Dictionary account. Interestingly, I think this also helps clear up the mystery behind their LiveJournal username. I think it probably is a play on Roman Polanski, but you know, people didn't know quite as much about him back then. And I think it's a portmanteau of Robin Sparkles from How I Met Your Mother and Casimir Pulaski Day by Sufjan Stevens, a song which I love, which features heavily in Carry It in My Heart. Needless to say, this all kind of reignited my drive to discover more artifacts from this historical moment. The first thing I did, just to cover all my bases, was look at the Tumblr blog that currently owns the Robin Sparkles URL. I was pretty confident that this was not the Robin Sparkles, since other users seemed pretty sure they'd deleted, but I just wanted to see what I could find. This person hadn't posted since 2017, and their blog was almost exclusively reblogs of Vines and the 1975 giveaway posts. A time capsule, to say the least. I found only a couple things of note. One was an ask that this blog had received from someone who clearly thought they were the author of Carry It in My Heart. They had answered the ask saying that they must be looking for the previous person who owned the Robin Sparkles URL because they didn't know what they were talking about. So that seems to be our answer right there. But the other interesting thing about this blog was that it contained numerous Taylor Swift hate posts, some penned by the blogger themselves. And yeah, Taylor Swift hate was pretty common on Tumblr at that time, still is really, but that seemed like a bit of a coincidence, knowing what we know about Robin and/or Casey. So a small part of me wanted to believe that there was some conspiracy here where Robin had pretended to delete their blog and pass on the URL to someone else, but had actually kept it and was now pretending not to be the author of Carry It in My Heart, like faking their own death. But realistically, after scrolling through way more of this blog than I probably had to, I do not think Robin/Casey was still running it. Their humor seems pretty different, and also, frankly, if they had ever been that into the 1975, I think we would have seen it pop up in their writing at some point. Anyway, in my little Tumblr search, I had found a few more posts linking to Carry It in My Heart on LiveJournal, so I decided to just try plugging those into the Wayback Machine one more time, just in case I could somehow get different results. And miraculously, I did. I found it. And then, sometime later, I realized that this whole time I could have just clicked on this link in the Carry It in My Heart fan lore page, and it would have taken me directly to the archived post. So I had basically gone to all of this effort for nothing, and the previous week had been a massive waste of my time. But you know what they say, it's the destination that counts, and the journey is utterly meaningless on every level. But either way, on August 27th, 2023, I got there. I was finally face to face with the original Carry It in My Heart master post by Robin-Pulaski. And I have no earthly explanation for this reaction. But when I laid eyes on this thing, I wept a little. I shed tears. It's not like I had been looking for it for that long, but this felt like my holy grail somehow. This was significant. And it is impossible to describe the funk that seeing this sent me into for the entire rest of the day. I had planned to keep working on this script, and I couldn't. I had to set it aside for a couple days. I know you're probably wondering why this had such an effect on me, and believe me, I'm wondering that too. I'm still trying to decode what this set off in me. In the days that followed, I kept coming back to this one idea, one concept, this thing called Stendhal Syndrome. I think I first heard of this through Dario Argento, of all people. It's basically this probably fake condition where you see a piece of art or an object that is so beautiful or so antiquated that you experience a physical reaction, like you faint or get dizzy or your heart races or maybe you go into a full-on fugue state. That's what happened to Argento when he was a kid. And that's what this experience felt like to me. You have to understand, when I say art or object, I don't mean the fanfiction itself. I mean this relic, the historical moment of it all, and even more so, the people that I saw here, encased in internet amber. That's the funny thing about this master post. That's all it is. It's the post itself and the author's note and the comments, but if you try to click on any of the chapters or on Robin's account, you get an error page. They weren't archived in time. All you can do here is look at the idea of this work and the person who made it and the people that loved it. I read through Robin's author's note, and it's so sweet and genuine, and they thank all of these people who helped beta read it. They link to their Tumblr blogs, and you can still click on those, and their time capsules in themselves. These people must have been so real to each other at the time. Then I read through all 35 comments, and everyone is just transported by this fan fiction. It's made them so happy. There are people who say it's the best thing they've ever read, someone who created a LiveJournal account just so that they could tell the author how much they loved their work, Someone who describes how stressful school is for them, how much they hate going, but how this fic got them through the day with a smile on their face. And taking all this in, I felt so much. I felt really sad, firstly. Not because the content of any of this was necessarily sad, but because this was such a bygone moment in time. All of these commenters, this author, these beta readers are no doubt completely different people now. This community that they had is no more. And although their thoughts are right in front of me, perfectly preserved, as if I'm there, I'm not. It's like finding a message in a bottle, or bodies in a bog. It reminded me of that quote from Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. That era has passed. Nothing that belonged to it exists anymore. These comments may as well be long-buried secrets whispered into holes in the wall. But perhaps what made me feel the worst, and what made it stick with me for the rest of the day and even longer, was this really powerful sense of shame. Suddenly, seeing the earnest outpouring of love and enjoyment from these people, including the author, the bemused, sardonic flame within me that usually drives my research into these strange topics died out. Before I knew it, I was no longer this icy cool explorer from the future, looking down fondly and condescendingly on a relic of obscure internet history. I was just a miserable grown-up, pointing and laughing at a group of happy kids. Because here was someone young, younger than I am now, unburdened and joyful. Someone who had found complete creative fulfillment in a very strange place, yes, but they had found it nonetheless. And better yet, they had found other people who loved this and wanted it as much as they did. And who the hell was I to look at them with anything but reverence? Once again, this has nothing to do with the actual content or quality of the fanfiction. I stand by everything I said about it. And I know it might seem like I'm being a little weird about this. I don't fully know where I'm going with this or what this means for this video in general, but it would just be dishonest of me in sharing this journey not to share the effect that seeing this social network fanfiction master post had on me. And I am nothing if not someone who likes to think deeply about things that not many people may have cared to think deeply about before. So before I conclude this video, I would just like to say that if you read and loved this fanfiction on LiveJournal 12 years ago, I am in awe of you. And Robin, Casey, wherever and whoever and whatever you are, I'm in awe of you too. To quote Casey McQuiston, well, I went into this video with 3 questions. Number 1, was Red, White, and Royal Blue originally a social network fanfiction with the serial numbers filed off? I think it's safe to say no. You all owe Casey a bit of an apology. There appears to be no social network royalty AU by this author, nor is there any example of a fanfic by this author that follows the same plot or shares significant similarities with Red, White, and Royal Blue. I know, it was probably really fun to parrot this rumor, but we can all give it a rest now. There is no evidence to speak of that suggests this rumor is true. And from now on, whenever you see someone spreading it in the wild, you can link them to this video, I guess. Number 2, did Casey McQuiston write the social network fanfiction Carry It in My Heart? In my now educated opinion, all signs point to yes. You'll notice I've been careful to say allegedly here and there, and sometimes call the author of Carry It in My Heart Robin or Robin-Pulaski instead of Casey. That's because, like, legally And just respectfully, I don't know if I should be claiming outright that they're the author like it's a fact, but I do think that's very, very likely the case. It's not just that the prose of the two works are similar, it's that, according to people who followed Robin's blog back in the day, they looked a lot like Casey McQuiston and had the exact same background. So yeah, I think that one's a pretty open and shut case. Allegedly. Number 3. Was Carry It in My Heart a precursor to Red, White, and Royal Blue in any way? I have to say, for all intents and purposes, no. I guess if you believe that any piece of writing by any author is technically a precursor to their later work, sure. But there really are not many unique similarities in the plots, the characters, or the structures of the two stories. Yes, they're both gay romances where one guy is American and one is British, but what, is Torchwood a precursor to Red, White, and Royal Blue now? I don't know why that's the only example I could think of. And yeah, I know the guy's Welsh. Whatever, get off my back. But of course, with all the more academic curiosities I laid out in this video more or less squared away, I found myself thinking about one more question. One that I think will be on a lot of people's minds, at least implicitly. Number 4. Does it matter that Casey McQuiston was most likely a prolific and well-known author of Social Network RPF prior to becoming a published author? Honestly, I don't think so. I think maybe you all are being a little mean, constantly bringing this up. Is it a funny factoid? Yeah, but does it have anything to do with the quality of their writing or whether they're a good person or not? No. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I mean no ill will at all towards Casey McQuiston, and if, God forbid, they somehow ended up finding this, I really would not want them to think that this is just me going on some bizarre, personal, invasive mission to slander them or whatever. If anything, I hope this video helps kind of clear their name of these rumors. A lot of writers, especially nowadays, were raised on fanfiction. A lot of writers today may have gotten their start in fanfic. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I think it's a pretty morally neutral medium. As I just detailed, I even managed to gain a new appreciative perspective on the people who enjoy this kind of thing, just on like a beauty of the world and the many facets of humanity kind of level. Some people have thoughts on the ethics of real person fanfiction specifically, like the idea that writing wildly fictionalized, often sexually explicit works about real people without their consent is kind of questionable, and honestly, historically, I have basically agreed with that. However, for one thing, even if it's questionable, I don't think it's necessarily a cancelable offense or anything. Like, usually at worst, it's just kind of weird. And also, I could definitely be wrong about this, but in this case, I can't help but think it's probably very unlikely that Andrew Garfield or Jesse Eisenberg themselves are aware of this particular fandom even existing. Unlike something like the After series, it just doesn't seem quite mainstream enough for it to have reached them. But again, who knows? If, God forbid, either Andrew Garfield or Jesse Eisenberg somehow find this video, they should contact me to do an interview. I'm free Thursday, so hit me up on Thursday when I'm free. I think I've said quite enough on this topic. Subscribe for more hard-hitting investigative journalism on fanfiction of David Fincher movies. Yeah, we're doing Mank next.